You know what no one really talks about? Infidelity doesn't begin with a kiss or a hotel room key. It begins with silence, with distance, with a look across the dinner table that says, "You're here, but you're not really here." And this is the place where it starts, emotional vacancy at home. And the scary part? You don't even realize it's happening until the damage is done. One day, you're just feeling off, a little ignored, a little disconnected. You shrug it off. You don't bring it up because you don't want to start something, but deep down, a space starts to open, a gap. And that gap becomes a breeding ground for danger. Most people think cheating is all about lust, but that's just the surface. What really happens is much quieter and much more dangerous. It's the emotional withdrawal that begins first. The moment someone stops feeling seen, they start looking for someone, anyone, who will see them. It might be a coworker who compliments their ideas, a gym friend who actually listens, a stranger online who says, "You deserve better." And while you might brush those moments off as small, they're actually the first steps away from home. Infidelity isn't a decision made in one big moment. It's made in a series of tiny ones. When your partner feels like they're not being acknowledged, not being appreciated, not being valued, that's when they become vulnerable. And vulnerability is where betrayal begins. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's desperate. Sometimes it's quiet, lonely, and full of shame. I want you to really think about this. When was the last time you made your partner feel important? Not just out of obligation, not as a routine, a love you, but genuinely, intentionally, lovingly. Do you still show up the way you did in the beginning? Or have you let life get so loud that you can't even hear each other anymore? Because this is how it begins: the cold shoulder, the distracted conversations, the phone screen that gets more attention than the person beside you. That's not just a bad habit, it's an opening. It's an opening. And someone, somewhere, is always ready to walk through it. If you're in a relationship right now, this is your moment to pause, to ask yourself, are we emotionally connected or just coexisting? Because if you don't water the garden at home, don't be surprised when someone else picks the flowers. The truth is, infidelity rarely starts with sex. It starts with someone feeling invisible. And if you're not careful, the person you love might start searching for someone who sees them when you stop looking. It always starts small. A reaction to a story, a late night like, a heart emoji on a photo. And before you know it, someone who was once just a follower becomes someone who feels closer than the person sleeping right next to you. This is the new playground for emotional infidelity: social media. And the most dangerous part? It feels harmless. It doesn't look like cheating. There's no physical touch, no hotel receipts. But make no mistake, emotional affairs are alive and well behind the glow of that screen. What starts as a compliment can quickly become a conversation, and that conversation can lead to connection, and that conversation can lead to connection, and that connection can become attachment. The lie we tell ourselves is, it's just a message. But when you start turning to someone else for attention, for approval, for validation, you're already giving away what should be reserved for your partner. When someone makes you feel seen in ways you haven't felt in a long time, you start chasing that feeling, even if it means compromising your relationship to keep it alive. The dopamine hit you get from attention is real. Every like, every flirty DMs, every suggestive comment, it becomes a form of currency. A little ego boost when you're feeling down, a distraction when things at home feel heavy. And that's where the danger lives, because it's not about the stranger. It's about the stranger. It's about the escape is addictive. Let me be clear, connection isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional, and digital. Emotional cheating often begins long before clothes ever come off. It begins when trust is replaced by secrecy. When your partner doesn't know who you're messaging at 1 a.m., or why your phone suddenly lives face down on the table. When a just friends becomes someone I don't want to stop talking to. And here's the hard truth. If you're hiding the conversation, if you're deleting messages, if you're telling yourself they just wouldn't understand, you already understand. You already know the line has been crossed, even if no one else does. What people forget is that intimacy is built through consistency, through the little things, through presence. And when that consistency shifts from your partner to a stranger online, that intimacy shifts with it. It's not about one big betrayal. It's about 100 tiny ones that feel innocent in the moment, but build up until they destroy everything real in your life. So if you've caught yourself leaning into the flattery of strangers, ask yourself why. What are you missing? What are you avoiding? Because attention from the outside will never fill a void you're ignoring on the inside. It's easy to get swept away in the fantasy of digital affection. But if you're not careful, you'll lose something real chasing something filtered. You clock in to work every day thinking it's just a job. But what if I told you that one of the most common breeding grounds for infidelity is the very place you go to earn a paycheck? We don't talk about it enough, but work creates a space for emotional intimacy that often flies under the radar. You share goals, you face stress together. You celebrate wins, and over time you start forming a connection with someone who isn't your partner, but who understands your daily life even better than they do. You're with them 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's more FaceTime than most couples get at home. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly. One extra long lunch, one too personal conversation, one late night project that turns into a vent session. And before you even realize it, the lines between professional and personal start to blur. What once felt like a safe boundary now becomes a slippery slope. And this is how it begins. Emotional availability that should belong to your partner starts to get redirected. You find yourself looking forward to seeing them. You dress up a little more. You seek their approval, their attention, their compliments. And when they give it to you, it feels good, really good. But it's not just the compliment, it's what the compliment replaces. It replaces what you've stopped hearing at home. It replaces the connection that's gotten stale, the conversations that feel like chores, the spark that's faded under the weight of routine. And instead of addressing the lack within your relationship, you feed it with external validation. Quietly, secretly, justified by the phrase, "we're just friends." But deep down, you know it's more than that. You know you're emotionally investing in someone outside of your relationship, even if there's no physical touch. You're sharing inside jokes, personal frustrations, your thoughts, your stress, the emotional currency that belongs to your partner. And whether you mean to or not, you start protecting that bond, defending it, prioritizing it. That's when danger starts to feel exciting instead of wrong. Because attention, when you're starving for it, can feel like affection. And familiarity, when you're lonely, can feel like love. And here's what's most dangerous. This kind of connection at work is easy to justify. You're not sneaking around. You're not lying. Yet, you're just doing your job. But emotional infidelity doesn't require secrecy in the beginning. It just requires neglect at home and emotional availability somewhere else. Work. That's the perfect cover. So ask yourself honestly, are you bonding or are you blurring? Are you committed to your partner? Or are you emotionally outsourcing your connection to someone in the next office over? Because unchecked closeness isn't harmless. It's a slow drift. And the longer you pretend it's nothing, the harder it becomes to admit it was always something. It always starts with something innocent, a deep conversation, a vulnerable moment, a shared laugh that lingers a little too long. And then suddenly, the person you once saw as just a friend becomes the person you can't stop thinking about. This is one of the most overlooked beginnings of infidelity, emotional dependency on a friend of the opposite sex. Not because you're trying to cheat, not because you're unhappy in a dramatic way, but because you've started to lean emotionally on someone who isn't your partner. And that leaning, if left unchecked, becomes something much heavier than you ever intended. Friendships matter. I'll never tell you to cut off meaningful connections in your life, but what I will say very clearly is this. When you start sharing pieces of your emotional world with someone else, especially the parts your partner doesn't even know about, you're walking into dangerous territory. It's not the friendship itself that's the problem. It's the emotional replacement happening right under your nose. We tend to gravitate toward people who make us feel heard, validated, seen. So if your relationship is going through a dry spell, if you're arguing more, feeling disconnected, or emotionally exhausted, it's easy to find comfort in someone who feels lighter, safer, easier. And that comfort quickly turns into confiding. You start sharing more with this friend than you do with your partner. You look forward to their texts. You replay their voice in your head. And even if nothing physical has happened, emotionally, you've already stepped outside your relationship. This is where things get blurry. Because society tells us you're allowed to have friends. But what it doesn't talk about is the depth of those friendships and how emotional intimacy when left unmonitored, mimics romantic connection. You don't need to kiss someone to cheat. You just need to give them access to parts of you that were meant to be protected inside your relationship. You know it's become a problem when you start hiding it, when you minimize how often you talk, when you feel guilty but convince yourself, I haven't done anything wrong. But if you're choosing not to tell your partner, that's your answer. You already know what this is becoming. There's nothing inherently wrong with friendships across genders. But there is something very wrong when your partner feels like they're competing with someone else for your emotional energy. Love requires boundaries, respect requires self-awareness, and commitment requires the discipline to protect your emotional connection, even from something that feels safe. So ask yourself, if your partner had the same kind of connection with someone else, would you be okay with it? Would you trust it? Or would it hurt? Because emotional betrayal doesn't just shatter trust. It leaves people questioning why they were no longer enough. And sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by touch. They're caused by words, attention, and emotional energy that no longer belong to the one you promised them to. No one ever thinks it starts with them. They assume infidelity is caused by what's missing in the relationship. But here's a truth most people aren't ready to face. Sometimes infidelity doesn't happen because of a bad partner. It happens because of unhealed parts of yourself. When you haven't addressed your own insecurities, you start to look outward for what you're not giving yourself. Maybe it's validation. Maybe it's excitement. Maybe it's attention you were denied in childhood or a sense of power you never had. And when someone comes along and gives that to you, it lights up a part of you that's been sleeping for years. But instead of healing it, you feed it. You let it grow. And that's where the danger begins. People cheat for 1,000 reasons, but one of the most overlooked ones is insecurity. Not the surface kind, the deep-rooted kind, the kind that whispers, I need to know I'm still wanted. I need to feel attractive again. I need someone to remind me that I matter. And if you haven't worked on healing those wounds, you will chase that affirmation wherever you can get it, even if it costs you your integrity. It doesn't always look reckless. Sometimes it's quiet, controlled, masked behind charisma and confidence, but deep down, there's a void. Deep down, there's a void, and that void becomes a craving, one that no partner, no matter how amazing, can truly fill. Because you've decided, whether consciously or not, that being chosen by someone else is what makes you valuable. And that's the lie you start to live by. You don't need to be unhappy to be tempted. You just need to be unguarded, unchecked, unaware of how your own unmet needs are driving your decisions. And the worst part is, when you're acting from insecurity, you'll often justify betrayal in the name of finding yourself. You'll call it freedom. You'll call it connection. But what it really is avoidance. Until you deal with your need for external validation, you'll always be vulnerable to temptation. Because no matter how loyal your partner is, no matter how stable the relationship seems, you'll keep chasing that feeling of being desired by someone new. And here's the thing. Being desired by someone else might feel good for a moment, but it won't heal what's broken inside of you. It won't make you whole. It will only make you dependent. If you're not working on yourself, you're a risk to the person who loves you most. Most. You owe it to them and to yourself to recognize when the real problem isn't the relationship, it's the parts of you you've been avoiding. So take a step back. Ask the hard questions. Are you looking for love, or are you running from yourself? Because sometimes the biggest betrayal isn't cheating on someone else, it's abandoning who you promised yourself you'd become. No one ever thinks the downfall will be boredom. That something as subtle as routine could slowly erode what once felt untouchable. But this is exactly where so many people slip, and they don't even see it coming. Because infidelity doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes, it walks in disguised as curiosity. We don't talk enough about how dangerous complacency is. When you stop putting in effort, when I love you becomes routine. When you stop noticing the little things about each other. When everything becomes expected, predictable, quiet. That silence can feel like safety until someone else brings noise. And suddenly what's familiar feels dull, and what's new feels exciting. That excitement becomes a spark. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake that spark for meaning. This is how the perfect storm happens. It doesn't require drama. It just requires a crack in consistency and a moment of curiosity. A what if? A just for fun, a casual interaction that leads to a lingering thought. When life starts to feel repetitive, people begin chasing novelty, not because they're ungrateful, not even because they want to hurt someone, but because they've confused stimulation with happiness. And here's the truth: if you stop feeding your relationship, it will starve. Starve. Even the healthiest connection will begin to wither if no one is showing up for it anymore. And that's what creates an opening. That's where someone else becomes appealing. Someone who doesn't see your stress, your worst moods, your unfiltered chaos. Someone who only sees the polished version of you, the charming version. And in the moment, it feels good to be admired again, to feel desired, to feel like you're new to someone. But being new to someone isn't the same as being loved by someone who's seen all your layers and stayed. That's the part we forget. We confuse chemistry with connection. We trade depth for distraction, and that trade, no matter how tempting, always comes at a cost. The danger in complacency is that it makes you vulnerable to fantasy. And fantasy is always easier than reality. It doesn't demand compromise, effort, growth, but relationships do. Real love requires maintenance, not just flowers on anniversaries or date nights once a month, but daily presence, consistent appreciation, emotional availability, the willingness to evolve with each other instead of drifting apart. If you're not intentionally growing closer, you're unintentionally growing apart. And in that gap, temptation waits. So you have to ask yourself, are you feeding your relationship, or are you assuming it will survive on yesterday's effort? Because if you're not watering it, someone else might. Curiosity will always exist. That's human. But acting on it, that's a choice. A choice that either protects what you've built or destroys it in the name of temporary excitement. And no moment of thrill is worth losing something real over. Not when it could have been saved with a little more intention, a little more effort, and a lot more awareness.